course, in Manchester and in London. Manchester sold out. For more information on London, go to davidicke.com, An Evening with David Icke. Now, social media is a great thing and it's a curse, but it's a great thing at times because you come across some really, really interesting people. A lot of the guests who come on this programme, I encounter them on Twitter or on Facebook, and our next guest fits that description because I came across his Twitter account, and I will tweet out details of where to follow him on Twitter. He's got a huge following on Twitter, and he's got a website called crimesofbritain.com where he talks a lot about British imperialism in modern times and historically as well. He's obviously talking a lot about the poppy appeal in recent days because, of course, Sunday is Remembrance Sunday. If you don't know anything about Remembrance Sunday, I'll briefly tell you, of course, it's on the, what is it this year, the 13th of November, or is it the 12th? It's the 11th, is it? What is it? I should know, shouldn't I? I had it written down somewhere, but it's this coming Sunday anyway, and it's about commemorating the contribution of British and Commonwealth military servicemen and women into 2 world wars and later conflicts. It's always controversial. So we're going to talk about that and much more. He's in London. Let's welcome to the programme Gerard McNamara. Gerard, welcome to the programme. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm really well. Thanks for coming on, by the way. Not everybody who I get in touch with comes back to me so quickly. I'm glad you're on this week of all weeks. And I like your website, by the way, crimesofbritain.com. I recommend our listeners take a look at it. Go and have a look at it, dear listener. You and I are going to find a lot of common ground this evening, Gerard. There's no doubt about that. But we might slightly differ on the issue of the poppy.
Okay.
I get where you're coming from. Iraq, Afghanistan, Northern Ireland, of course, and elsewhere. But I think this programme, I've been doing this programme 3 years, and I hear from a lot of people. And there would be a lot of people whom would be very much in agreement with you on British imperialism. But when it comes to the poppy, they think of the very senior men, some of them very infirm at this stage of their lives, who were in the Second World War. Very few, if any, I don't think there's anybody left from World War One, and the injuries they sustained and the things they saw and the problems they had. And they see the poppy as kind of saying thanks to them, but they don't, for them it's not mutually exclusive that by supporting that, they're not in any way, they don't feel in any way they're supporting British imperialism. What do you think?
Well, the poppy itself, it's to remember every single British soldier from the First World War onwards. So that includes every other war other than World War One and Two. It involves every conflict, of which Britain has had well over 140 since the end of World War II alone. So we can't sit there and pick and choose. The British Legion are very clear that that's their line. And if you buy a poppy from the British Legion, you have to go with their definition. There's alternatives out there, which I actually have an issue with the white poppy, but from a different angle. Fundamentally, my argument would be this. I don't regard British soldiers who fought in conflict after World War II as victims, and the white poppy portrays them as such. Now, the red poppy is to celebrate, and also it promotes modern day British imperialism. The funds raised by the British Legion are used to finance veterans of modern day genocidal campaigns. And I understand it's a, if you will, very emotive issue, but the fact remains the poppy is to support every soldier since World War One.
Yeah, and look, I hear you loud and clear. And we're going to talk about some of the more modern imperialist campaigns, and I spent a lot of time this afternoon reading your blog and reading your site, and you're doing a lot of really good work on Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Yemen, of course, all very important and very current as well. I wouldn't ban the poppy, or I wouldn't see it banned. I mean, I don't identify as anything other than just a bloke who's interested in current events. But for a long time, I suppose I still am an Irish Republican. I believe in a united Ireland by peaceful means. I'm well aware of the things that the British Army did in the north of Ireland over the years. I'm a history graduate. And I absolutely understand why a football player like James McLean, coming from Derry, would say, look, I'm not going to wear the poppy. That's his absolute right. But I also think people have a right to buy the poppy if they believe that it goes some way to giving some comfort to soldiers from the Second World War. Again, men who had no choice in many cases, who saw unspeakable things and were witness to unspeakable things, and sometimes they did very heroic things in battle. I think I think there's room for for both. Do you go along with that?
I don't want to ban the poppy in Britain. That's none of my business. I don't see it as that. That's for people here who recognise and pledge their allegiance to the British state to decide. James McLean himself stated he would wear a poppy if it was just to commemorate the soldiers from World War I and II. And while people may have this idea in their head, because it's certainly perpetuated by the poppy appeal, it doesn't overtly, and in recent years it's changed a little bit, but overtly they don't say it's to support every single conflict. They try and make it about World War I and II because those are seen as just wars in Britain.
Yeah.
Those are seen as, they're really the only two conflicts where they can pick out. In World War I, obviously people were just starved into fighting in some cases, and in World War II they would promote it as a fight against fascism. Of course, for British elites it was more about clinging onto their empire, but for your ordinary Brit, I would say they went along with that ideal that it was against fascism. Now, the conflicts after that, though, they don't mention them as much, obviously because they cannot justify any of them. I would claim personally, I don't think there's any conflict they can justify other than that, other than World War II, and that's why they use World War II in their campaign so much.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And there's a lot of unwritten history about the lead up to both the First and Second World Wars that a lot of people don't know. I would absolutely agree with that. I would echo that. Can we talk just for a minute about soldiers, Gerard? Because, again, as a journalist, and I consider you to be a journalist, we will have covered over the years, the unspeakable things that happen in conflict zones. There's no doubt about that. We spend a lot of time talking on this programme about why certain conflicts happen, who's behind them, and what the agendas are. But on the ground, of course, you usually have young men. And in this country, as well as the United States, you have traditionally often had young men with little else going for them. They get into the army because it's a career, it's a way of getting a few quid, and it's a way of avoiding, unemployment, destitution, poverty, whatever. I think I might have a little bit more sympathy for the man who ends up wearing a uniform than you do, because I think circumstances force people into the army. They don't know what they're getting in for when they join the army. We're often talking about people, not stupid people, not at all, certainly no less intelligent than you or I, but people who are not educated. They get in there, often they're pressured to go in there, and as we've seen in the last 20 years, they're off in some desert in the Middle East before they know where they are, and they're subject to the most appalling they're being asked to do, pressured to do, forced to do the most appalling and unspeakable things. For me, it's not black and white about soldiers. I get the impression from your website, which is very good, by the way, crimesofbritain.com, folks, check it out, is that you do lay a lot of blame at the individual soldier.
Certainly I do. I mean, I hold everybody accountable is my position from the top to the bottom. And, conscription doesn't exist in Britain. Now, some may argue that there's an ideological conscription because it's in your face so much, the propaganda. But I just don't buy the argument that people in 2017 are not aware what going in the army entails. Now, certainly there is propaganda, as I say, but people know right from wrong. They know that to murder is wrong. They know that to facilitate the mass looting of a nation is wrong. Theft, this from a very young age.
Yeah.
So conscription here doesn't exist. And, the argument that people, have no other options, plenty of people in this country are poor. And they don't decide to saunter off and join a military escapade and get involved in the game of murder. Many of them hold down very low-paid jobs, and many of them decide not to go into that career. Many people, I would imagine, would rather remain unemployed than go into the British Army. Yeah,
absolutely. But there are a lot who don't know any better. And I'm getting tweets now from people. It's an interesting area of research. We're not going to get into it today, but we've seen over the last 20, 25 years, haven't we, Gerard, games consoles, where games that are funded by the military-industrial complex, this is all true. I've spoken to so many people about this, brainwashing very young kids into seeing the army and war as very, very sexy. The poorest of people do end up going into the army There's no doubt about that. Look, you're right, there is no conscription. But we are in a kind of a Hunger Games society. We have been for years, where things have been more and more difficult. Industry has basically disappeared out of the country. And for many young lads who are able-bodied with no education, it's kind of like a last resort for them. And
I'm not sure though if it's, in some cases that may be so, a last resort. But even Richard Kemp, that Brit Colonel, he said he joined the army because he was a thug. I'm sure many people have many different reasons for joining it. And with regards to